And then as we close this evening, I want to share a story with you. Our Wednesday night Bible study class 2 weeks ago had talked about how we need to be able to share our story. And I want to share my story with you. I know some of you know that, and this comes along with tearing down fences, because we need to know what our story is about coming to a relationship with Jesus when he tore down the fence for me. And I need to be able to share that with you. And then I'm going to go a little further on my story. But my story began back in 1986. I grew up in a large church. I didn't know anybody in that church. We went to church every single Sunday. I knew about God, and I knew about Jesus my entire young life. But I didn't know anybody in the church. I only knew my family that we went to. My mom and dad, and my mom went. It was kind of funny. My mom knew people in the church. And my dad went on Christmas and sometimes Easter. And because my dad was in the community a lot, he would walk in and make my mom mad, because he'd walk in and the usher would say, "Hey, Bill, how you doing? Come on, I got a seat right up here for you." And she'd be like, "I've been going to this church my whole life and nobody's ever offered me a seat right up front." And that made her upset. But I grew up in this large church, knew about God, knew about Jesus, but never knew that I could have a personal relationship with Jesus. And then Sue and I had a crisis situation in our lives, and we wanted to just retract from the world for a little bit. So we went out to my brother Bob's in Pennsylvania. Now, many of you know my brother Bob, and he got saved 5 years before me and was praying for me for 5 years that I would come back to God. And we left his place saying, you know what? 2 of us haven't been to a church since we were young. As teenagers, Mom couldn't make me go to church anymore. I didn't go to church. And so we didn't go. As young adults, after we got married, we didn't go to church. We just had our busy lives and did everything we did, and church was not a part of it. But after we came back from my brother's, we came back home and we said, you know what? Let's go to church. I don't want to go to the big church that I grew up in. Let's go to a church. Let's find a church like Bob's church. You know, just a little country church where you can know people. We opened up the Brunswick newspaper. Oh my goodness. Look at all these kinds of churches that are out there. I didn't know all these existed. Where am I going to go to church? I don't know anything about anything. I mean, there's this one and this one and this one. I don't know anything about any of them churches. Well, let's go to the church that Bob went to when he was in town. Because the church that he went to in his little community was Rich Valley Wesleyan Church. And when he came to town, he went to this church. Where's that church at? Columbia Station. I've never been west of Prospect Road. Columbia Station was out in the middle of nowhere. I didn't know where it was. So we took off to come here, and we went one Sunday, and we started driving down West River Road the wrong way. Driving. Can't find this church. This church ain't nowhere. So we went back home that day. Next Sunday, we went out again. This time a little smarter, I looked up the address, where it was. And, I mean, this was before computers, so you couldn't just Google it. You couldn't just on your phone, you know. I mean, this was before MapQuest and everything else. You had to really look if you wanted to find an address. And so we left way early enough to get here. And we finally pull into the church, and we open the door, and a young man opens the door, and we said, well, what's time's Mass? And he said, well, Mass is at 11 o'clock, and it's only 10 o'clock now, so if you want, you can go into Bible study. Well, I've never been in a Bible study in my life. Okay. So we went into the Bible study, and he put us in the adult class that was going through the quarterly. It was kind of interesting. It was fun. And then we went to church service. We went to that, and it had a country preacher at that time, and he was kind of a hellfire and brimstone kind of guy. We walked out going, I don't know if I like that. Well, let's try it again next week. We went back next week. Well, the next week they had a choir cantata where the choir was singing the whole service. And walked out of there going, I didn't really like that. They didn't let us sing. I like to sing, you know, maybe why didn't they let us sing? They just all sang all the songs. We didn't know any of them. There wasn't anywhere to put the words up on the screen like we have for you guys. There was none of that. So, all right, well, let's go back next week. We went back the next week. It was a little better. We liked it. And then the pastor says, well, why don't you come back tonight? What do you mean, come back tonight? He said, well, we have Sunday evening service. I said, well, we just went to church. What do we have to come back tonight for? He goes, well, we have Sunday morning, then we have Sunday evening, and then we have Wednesday services too. I said, wow, you guys really go to church. Now get it yet. I'm not saved yet. My brother's been praying for me for 5 years, and we're just trying out this church. And there was a good group of people, and then they had a dinner outside on the table out in the grass area there, because there was more people than the little fellowship hall over here could hold. And they set tables out there on the grass, and we're out there eating food out on the grass and having some good fellowship. It was really good and fun. And I grabbed a piece of banana cream pie and set it down in front of me, and took a big fork full of it, stuck it in my mouth. It was coconut cream. I don't like coconut. And the little old lady sitting across from me had made the pie, and she goes, how's the pie, honey? Pretty good. Well, then the next week we came back, they had a gospel singer here. His name was Major Young, and his band was Gospel Street. And I know Greg is probably the only guy here that knows who that is. But they sang this song, and the chorus went like this. It said, I love you, Lord, I love you, Lord. You're the reason that I sing. Stay with me now, close by me now. You are my everything. And the guy stood up here and he said, you know what? We make Christianity out to be a lot of things. But all it is a loving God that wants us to love him back. I had never been in a church service where they did altar calls. I didn't know what an altar call was. But I knew I had to come up here and kneel right there. Say, God, I want to love you like that man's talking about. And I gave my heart to Jesus, kneeling right there. I don't know it for a fact, but Lee Gilman told me that he was the guy that came up and prayed with me while I kneeled there. And that changed my life. And for the next, I'll bet it was probably 3 years, every single Sunday morning, I would stand up and praise the Lord for something God did for me that way. Just a little while later down the road, a great old couple named Drexel and Belva Smith came to our house and shared the gospel with Sue, and at our kitchen table, she invited Jesus as her Lord and Savior. And we were at church on Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday evening, and any other time the doors were open. And I would open up my Bible and read it every single day because I wanted more of God. And I wanted to know about this God that loved me so much that he died on the cross for me. And that was February of '86. I was 32 years old. And then the pastor, we got to be in a good relationship with him. We got to know them and their family pretty good. And he invited me to help them with the youth group. They were going to camp out over the hill. And he found out I played an acoustic guitar. He said, why don't you come and join us one night with the youth group and play your guitar, and we'll sing songs down by the campfire. He said, I'll show you what to play and stuff. I said, oh, okay, I'll do that. It was probably end of May. Sue and I took a journey out to my brother's to go visit him for the weekend. And we come back, and the pastor's gone. He left. Something happened in the church. We weren't involved in leadership or anything, so I really don't know what all happened, but he left. And here we are, young Christians. We just got to know this pastoral family and building a relationship with him, and he's gone. And now we don't have a pastor. And I don't even remember that one because, like I said, I wasn't involved in leadership and stuff. But I'm sure it took a while to find another pastor. And then we got the next pastor. He was a younger guy. Once again, we developed a good relationship as Pastor Chris. And I also got to back up a little bit. Because this guy left, everybody says, well, you were going to help the pastor with the teen group for Vacation Bible School. And the person that was doing youth at the time, he says, well, why don't you do Vacation Bible School with the teens? And I'm like, I never taught nothing in my life. I don't even like teenagers. What are you talking about? I got two of them that cut through my yard, and I yell at them every single time they cut through. Get out of my yard, you stupid teenagers! What's the matter with you? Go around the road like you're supposed to. Well, and then after the Vacation Bible School, I volunteered, I did it. I held Vacation Bible School in my old 1967 Chevy van. I had Don Francisco, if anybody knows who that is, on my radio, and I made Bible lessons off of his tape. I don't know how I did that, but I did. But then the youth leader at that time comes up and says, you did such a great job with those kids at Vacation Bible School, why don't you become a youth leader? Okay, God, if that's what you want for me, I'll do that. So then Pastor Chris got it. And in 1990, he encouraged me to start taking some classes to pursue a pastoral role in the church. And in 1994, I received my district license and was the first year that I was your pastor of some sort. I was a youth pastor at that time. That's all my title was. But then Pastor Chris encouraged me to get more and more involved in ministry, and I took more and more classes and was working towards ordination, and then I became the assistant pastor. And it was kind of exciting, I had this cool title, I was assistant pastor to Pastor Chris, and things were going along all real good. But then in 96, something happened. Huge controversy in the church. People started biting and devouring each other like we talked about last week, and Pastor Chris left. Before Pastor Chris left, a third of the people left. We were probably running close to 100 at the time, maybe a little bit more, but a third of the people left because of the controversial problem. And then when Chris left, he took another third with him and went down and started a church in Valley City, and I was bitter. I was extremely bitter that God would allow this to happen to our church, and things were going fantastically well. People were involved, youth group was growing, all kinds of things. And then we spent, by this time I was involved in leadership, we spent the whole entire summer looking for a pastor. And in the Wesleyan Church, you would have people come in and candidate, and they would preach, and then you would go and talk with the board, and they would decide whether or not they want this guy or not this guy. And we went through, I think, like 3 of them that year, and finally decided on Pastor Dale. Many of you know Pastor Dale. I just spoke to him yesterday because I was thinking about this whole story. He's doing well, wants to come and visit you and says hi. But Pastor Dale was a good pastor. He was here for some 15 years, and then he was just getting old and tired and needed to retire and wanted to be with his family out in Indiana, so Pastor Dale retired. In the midst of Pastor Dale and that, I became an ordained pastor. And so when Pastor Dale retired, people asked me, hey, do you want to be senior pastor? And I said, no, I don't really want to do that. Because many of you know, I also operate a family-run insulation business. And it was in that time frame, my dad was still alive, and I was taking care of my dad. He had had a stroke. He was not in the business anymore. I was running his business and taking care of him and being youth pastor and associate pastor, and I didn't want to be senior pastor. So we looked for a pastor. From June till September, we looked. And we interviewed, and we interviewed, and we interviewed, and we finally called Pastor here, Pastor Jim. And Pastor Jim came into the church, and boy, I'll tell you what, he was on fire with a program agenda, and he changed things. A lot of what you see up here today is because of Pastor Jim. He changed a lot of things, and it upset a lot of people. And here again, we were fighting and devouring each other. And a bunch of people left. Now, this is the fourth pastor I've been through as a Christian. And each time I said, well, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. This is my church. If the board will have me stay on as associate, I'll stay on, and we'll look for somebody else. So when Jim left in November, I started preaching each and every week. And I liked it. Prior to that, I only got to preach maybe once or twice or 3 times a year, because the senior pastors, they just love to preach. And so I said to the board in the board meeting, I said, you know what? I think I'm ready. My dad has passed away. My business is running well. I've got 2 guys in my business, my 2 nephews that are helping me out extremely well. I think I can take on the role of senior pastor if the church will have me. And so it was February of, things shut off here, I don't know where it is. It was February of 2016 that we had a special conference vote, and you all voted me in as your senior pastor. And that brings us up to where we are here today. But in that wanting to be your senior pastor, I said, I'll only do it under one circumstance. I'll only do this if I can hire an associate that we can share the duties and the roles, and he's coming with the idea that he'll become the next senior pastor. I'll only do it if you'll all agree to that. And you all said yes. That was February. In June, I had Pastor John and Aaron, they were coming to visit from Iowa to visit their families, and our district superintendent told John, hey, I think I got a job for you, because John was wanting to move back from Iowa and was looking for a senior pastor role. He says, I think I got a position that you might like. And so John and Aaron and his family came over to our house, and kids played in the swimming pool, and we sat out on my picnic table there while we were watching kids play in the pool. And we discussed the idea of him coming to be associate. That was in June. In August, his moving truck pulled in. He had sold his house in a week, and y'all invited him into your hearts and your lives. And I told him, I said, you may be an associate by title, but we're equal. I'm senior pastor and you're associate, but we're equals here, and you're going to preach. And you're going to preach series, and you're going to get to preach half the time of the year, and I'm going to preach the other half the time of the year. And I get it, I'm the senior pastor, and the buck stops with me. If something goes wrong, everybody looks at me. I get that. But last month, Pastor John and myself met with our district superintendent to talk about our church and church health and where we're at and where we're going and stuff. And John shared in that conversation that he's ready to step into a full-time position. I don't know how many of you know this about Pastor John, but since he's been here, he's usually working 2 or 3 jobs at one time while he's being your associate pastor. I'm running a family business while I'm being your senior pastor. So we're both bivocational, and he's been actually even helping me in my business. He works for me. He worked for Ed cleaning uniforms. He works for a landscaper shoveling dirt. He's worked for a snowplower shoveling snow, just so he can make ends meet with his family. He says, I'm ready to move into a full-time position where I don't have to work 3 jobs to make ends meet. And so our discussions about that started moving forward from there. And I came to the board and said, you know what? I think it's time that we allow John to step into the senior pastor role. And I step back and support him. For the last 7 years, Pastor John has been supporting me in every decision I want to move forward with, and I appreciate that. I appreciate his preaching, I appreciate his messages, but I want to see him move on. And I'll just step back. And I told you at conference last year in June that in 2 years I'll be 70 years old, and I will have had 30 years of pastoring in this church, and I will have had 50 years of being in business of ABC Insulation, and I'm about ready to retire. But retirement scares the death out of me. I can't see myself doing that. I'm a workaholic. I love working. I juggle 5 things at once, and I somehow get them all done. Sometimes I forget things, sometimes I don't. But a lot of what I can't do, John can do. And a lot of what John can't do, I can do. And I'd like to step back and allow John to step forward. And so we had meetings with the board. And if you want to know who your board members are, we put it in the bulletin this week. If you got any questions for them, make sure you talk to your board members. But I'm excited about this because I'm not leaving. And the board's okay with this, and especially Pastor John's okay with this. I'm going to step back to the associate pastor role and allow him to be senior pastor. So if anything goes wrong, the buck stops there. And I'm excited for him and what God's going to do in his life and his family. And I've already seen him step up to the plate. Just in board meeting, just because we're having these conversations, he's already said, you know what, I'd like to try this. And I'm excited about that. And I want you to be excited about it as well. It's not a negative thing here, folks. Because you know what? We don't have to have the pastor left. And we have to look for another guy and wonder what the next guy is going to be like and how many things he's going to change and he's going to upset this person and that person because you've known John for 7 years. He's probably let down a few fences. I mean, I still got fences, and you know me for 30. I mean, well, not all of you. I've been here that long. But I want to support him the way he's supported me. And I want you to support him the way he's supported me. And this won't take place until conference in June, where the transition will actually shift. And we're going to continue preaching series. I'll preach a series, and he'll preach a series, and a few of the things will stay the same. But I know as a young man, he's got different ideas than an older man. And I'm excited about that. And I want you to be excited about that. So if you got any questions for me or Pastor John, please come and ask us. But just know that I'm not disheartened about this. I'm not grumbling about this. I don't want anybody to grumble about this. I want this to be the most positive thing we've done because I believe this is in God's timing. God brought him here in a week's notice. God set him up to be your next senior pastor. Amen.